Anna Durbin. For those of you who don't know me or who I don't know very well, I'll talk a little bit about myself, but then I'll dive right into it. So what I'm going to be talking about today is what Casey was just speaking about, a lot about mental health and mental illness, specifically with eating disorders, but also going into the stigmas around them, how to stop them, how to prevent them, all of that good stuff. So a little bit about myself, as I'm a senior this year. Recently switched my major and minor around, but I am a strategic communications major and a human service minor. So I'll be graduating pretty soon. I'm involved in a couple things on campus, one of which being Project HEAL. So Project HEAL is an organization that I brought to Elon specifically this year, but it's a national organization, and what they do is mainly raise money for a national treatment fund that goes to people who can't afford their own treatment for eating disorders, because unfortunately that can go up to hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're forced into inpatient treatment. So what we do is we have profit shares and fundraisers to raise money for that fund, on top of spreading awareness and education and just talking about what eating disorders are and how to handle them. So that's what I'm going to be talking about with you today, is my journey through my struggle and recovery from anorexia, as well as what I found in the midst of that journey, in the midst of that recovery. So how I found balance in all aspects of my life, not just with food and exercise, but also talking about how I got away from striving for perfectionism in everything that I did, and everything that I was able to do in order to find that balance between health and happiness. So to begin, I'm going to ask one question, and without filtering what you think or without thinking that you need to say the right thing, just shout out a few things that you have come to mind when I say the word healthy. What are a few things that first pop into your heads?
Exercise.
Exercise, working out, what were the other ones? Salad. Lettuce. Good. So where did we learn that these words are healthy? Where did we learn that there is a link between healthy and lettuce, and there's a link between healthy and working out? Who told us that? Everywhere. It's everywhere. It's on magazine covers, it's in movies, it's on TV shows, it's from our friends, it's everywhere. So what I learned was that there's really no teaching where the line between healthy and too far is. And these things aren't necessarily synonymous. I say this because there is a balance that we can find, and I'm a testament to that. I'm all about balance, as you can tell, but when you take that one step too far, that's when things go wrong. So Ed is the name I gave to my eating disorder, and it's not a person, so don't get confused, but it's somebody that I decided I needed to personify in order to defeat. So my eating disorder is obviously a part of me. It's a mental illness that goes on in my head, but it was too confusing for me to fight myself. So I knew that I needed to recover from an eating disorder, but I couldn't differentiate between what my thoughts were and what the eating disorder's thoughts were. So in order to do that, and this quote is something that still sends chills through my spine, I thought about this eating disorder as a person, and I thought about it as an abusive boyfriend. That was my tool. I thought about him as somebody that was abusing me physically and mentally, but also somebody who was telling me every single day that I was worthless. And I was getting angry, but I didn't have enough anger to retaliate, so I just let him keep taking over until I couldn't fight him anymore because he was too strong. And I'd given him way too much power. And I read this quote still every now and again because when I fall back into old habits, or when I start to think that maybe life was easier with my eating disorder, I remind myself that it's all lies and it's all deception, because that's what abusers do. And he lied and deceived me to the point where he almost took my life, and that's what made me turn around. But until I realized that, I was 110% on his team. So my battle with Ed started when I was 16. It was my junior year of high school. So for me, that was the year of 2013, and my family and I laugh, ironically. We shouldn't laugh at this. We call it Unlucky 13, because everything that could have gone wrong that year went wrong. So it started in February, 2 months after the new year came in, and a beloved family member of ours passed away. And I had never felt lost before. I didn't really know what depression was, but I knew that as soon as this family member had passed away, that I wasn't okay anymore. I didn't really know how to fathom my feelings. I didn't know what to do about them. So all I did was I started to isolate myself and start to keep these feelings inside because I thought that's how people mourned. So as I started to fall deeper and deeper into this depression that I still didn't know was depression, I began to isolate myself. And as I isolated myself, my friends weren't really around anymore because I wasn't being my fun, happy-go-lucky self that I was all the years that they had known me. And I wasn't going out anymore, and I wasn't wanting to even go see a movie or go out to dinner because I was so sad. And nothing brought me joy, so I figured, okay, well, I'm not going to suck the life out of everybody else. I'm just going to sit at home and do this on my own. So friends started to drop left and right, and then a relationship that I was in for 4 years ended shortly after the passing of my family member. So now I felt completely alone. I had lost a family member, a majority of my friends, and now my boyfriend, which in the midst of high school seems like the end of the world. And I didn't know what to do. So as soon as all of these things started to go, my sports also started to suffer. And I was an athlete my entire life. I started gymnastics at the age of 3, did that for 15 years competitively, also ran track and field. I loved to be active. I loved yoga. I loved everything about it. But as I started to isolate myself and as I started to feel these symptoms of depression, which a lot of the time is suppressed appetite, lack of energy, I couldn't practice anymore. And when I started to not be able to practice, I got frustrated because that was my outlet. That's what I did when I was stressed. That's what I did when I was really anxious. I just went and I took it out on the track or in the gym because that's what I knew how to do. It was never in an unbalanced way. That was just who I was. So now all these things had gone, 3 strikes, and I realized that I had no control over my life. I couldn't control that I lost a family member. There was nothing I could do to bring her back. I couldn't beg my friends to hang out with me anymore. That was their choice. I couldn't beg my boyfriend to come back into my life. And I couldn't fuel myself because I wasn't hungry, because I was so sad. And I couldn't give my body what it was asking for. So when all these things started to slip, I realized that Ed was gaining power every single time I listened to him. So every decision that I made that he encouraged gave him strength. So this illness convinced me, unfortunately, that the only way to gain my happiness was to hit the weight in my head that I had set, because everything I had heard said that happiness was synonymous with being skinny. And because I had lost my happiness, I figured that this was going to cure everything. That Ed told me that as soon as I dropped to the weight that I had set, that everything would disappear, and I would be so confident that my happiness would just come back automatically and I wouldn't worry anymore. But what Ed doesn't tell you is that nothing's ever enough for him, and the weight that I had originally set in my head, he didn't like. So when I hit it, he dropped it again, and again, and again, and again, and it was never enough. And that's a phrase that I'll use a million times throughout this, because one thing with an eating disorder is that he's never satisfied. So what I thought was the magic cure only worsened these issues and got me deeper and deeper into my disorder. And before I knew it, the control that I thought I was seeking was something I no longer had control over, and it was now controlling me. So this starts a vicious cycle, because what I started with just wanting to lose 5 pounds, I lost 5 pounds, and I still wasn't happy, but Ed told me, you're just not there yet. If you lose 5 more, maybe we'll get there. So I listened, and I lost 5 more, and I still wasn't happy. So he said, okay, you're just not there yet. The word was always yet at the end of his sentences, because it wasn't ever going to be enough, but I believed that I would get there, so I was listening. And then 10 turned into 20, which still wasn't enough, and 20 turned into 30, and 30 turned into 40, and before I knew it, he told me that you're just not there, but you're on the right track, and that gave me hope. Because I thought that, okay, you're right, maybe I'm just not doing it well enough yet, I have to dedicate more of my life to this, and then I'll find the secret to happiness. But as it continued to fall into the cycle, and all that was left of me was skin and bones, and I still wasn't happy, I started to think, well, maybe he's not right, but there was nothing I could do about it because he had too much power. So I go throughout high school, and I graduate from high school, and life is okay, I'm stable. I'm able to continue living because my parents are hawks, and they were doing anything they could to just keep me above water. So my body was healthy enough to continue on. I was still able to just live a normal life. I didn't have to go into treatment quite yet. I was doing a couple therapy sessions, but that was about it. So then I knew that I was going to have to uproot from Pennsylvania and come all the way to North Carolina, which Ed loved. He knew that he was going to be able to take over 100% as soon as I left my family, because those were the only people who were keeping me on track. Those were the only people who were keeping me accountable, and they were the only ones that were making sure that I was taking care of myself. But I convinced them and everybody else in my life, including myself, that I was going to be fine, and I even convinced myself that if I uproot from PA and I come all the way to North Carolina, that maybe Ed would just stay in Pennsylvania. Maybe if I was going to be so busy and worried about making new friends and worrying about figuring out my class schedule that I wouldn't have time to think about it. But what I didn't realize was that this change in schedule and this change in scenery was going to be the kiss of death for me. But I was trying to be optimistic, and I was trying to think that maybe it'll disappear, and maybe I won't think about it as soon as I move in. But what happened when I got to school was I no longer used my family to keep me accountable, but I lied to them every chance I got. Because Ed loved the fact that he had more power, and he went with it. So when my mom would call every night, and she would say, "Did you eat dinner?" I would say, "Yep, I already ate it. I'm so full. It was great. Thank you for asking. We're doing well." And the next morning she would call, she said, "Okay, make sure you don't go to the gym today. I know you're going to be tempted, but just make sure you don't go. I would call her at the end of the day. I'd say I didn't go. I had spent 3 hours in there earlier. Poker face. I didn't even hesitate. There was nothing in me that even thought about telling the truth because that wasn't an option. Ed would not let that happen. He would never let that happen. And I became the best liar on this campus. I became the best liar in this state. I was so good at it that nobody knew when it was happening because there was no change in expression. There was no change in demeanor. I lied and I walked away. So I lied so often that nobody knew what I was doing here. Nobody knew how I was feeling. And I covered my body up to the point that nobody could really see. Obviously, I looked different. Nobody could see how extreme it was because I wouldn't let anyone see that. I didn't want people to get worried and I didn't want to get help. So I was going to hide the best that I could. But college campuses are unfortunately famous for emphasizing how important it is to be skinny. And when I see, these are simple searches on the internet. If you look up skinny, these are the first things that come up. And these aren't things that we just search for. They're fed to us, they're read to us, we talk about them, and we glorify them because we think that these are the answers. And when this demon is already telling me that this is what's going to solve my problems, and then I read about it, and I hear about it, I think, well, heck, it must be right because everybody's saying it. So when I got to school and I thought maybe this will be an escape, it was rather me diving face first into all the pressures that I was trying to avoid back home. But now it was every day, nobody was here to help me, and I was doing this 100% alone. So as I listened to all of these things being told to me, I started to fall really, really deeply into a self-comparison trap. Because I thought that, okay, I might not be the skinniest person in the entire world, but I need to be skinnier than everybody around me. Or I need to be smaller and fitter and more toned than everyone around me. And as I started to do that, everyone on this poor college campus became a target. Because I needed to be better, and the only way I could be better was to be smaller. So if I walked into a room and I saw somebody who was smaller than me, I would skip a meal that night. It was simple. Or if I came out of my dorm the next day and I saw somebody jogging by, I would add 2 hours of exercise to my workout the day because I needed to be better than them. And if you know life, you can't avoid people when you're out in the open. No matter who I saw, there was another trigger. It was another thing I needed to compete with, another way that I needed to prove myself, and I needed to show that I had more willpower than that person. And let me tell you, it's exhausting. Because no matter where I was or who I was with, I was competing. And you can't compete everywhere you go. But I did, and it drove me into a black hole because you're never going to be the best, and I needed to accept that. I needed to accept that I'm not ever going to be the smallest person in this world. I'm not ever going to be the prettiest person in this world. I won't ever be the most toned. But that's not what the answer is to happiness. It's realizing that you are who you are, and that's okay. But I didn't know that, and I wanted to be the smallest. I thought that was the only answer. So as the isolation began, because the self-comparison was too much, I needed to avoid triggers. I spent every day, all day long in my room. I barely went to class because I was so malnourished that my eyes couldn't stay open. And then if I went out and I heard somebody say something that triggered me, the day was over, I went home and I called it quits because I had tried, but it didn't work. And I spent probably 85% of my freshman year of what I was here for in my dorm. In the corner of my bed, with tears in my eyes, calling my mom, asking for help, but nobody knew what to do. So Ed tightened his grip. It got worse and worse and worse. And I was terrified that I wasn't going to be able to get out of this, but I didn't have any way to fight it because I knew that now Ed was part of me. Or I had accepted that, and I didn't really want to do anything about it because it was too hard. And now he'd become ingrained in my brain. He'd become ingrained in my daily routine, and I didn't really know how to live without him. And unfortunately, this stigma behind eating disorders is that it's a choice, is that what I'm doing is just going to be a diet, I'm going to lose the weight, and I'm going to go back to normal living. But unfortunately, that's not the case, or even remotely the case. And what happened to me was I had to hit my rock bottom in order to realize that. But what my mission is to tell everybody that that rock bottom is not something you have to hit in order to recover. It's something that we can see in other people and learn from. And I hope that my experience is something that everybody can learn from because this rock bottom is terrifying. And I got to a point where Ed was taking over, but what I didn't realize was that Ed's plan wasn't to ever help me, or it wasn't to ever make me better or happier. Ed's plan was to take over my life and move on to the next victim. So what he was going to do was kill me, and then find somebody else to kill, and then find somebody else, and this vicious cycle continues. But if anybody knows me, I am one determined bugger, and I do not let people take over. I do not let people control me. I do not let people tell me what to do. And for years and years, I let that happen because I lost sight of myself. But now Ed was happy because he was getting what he wanted, and I was dying to do it. But I thought that this was what was working. He told me this was going to make me happy, so I fell for it. And again, he was going to kill me and move on to someone else. He's ruthless. He doesn't care about you, but I was convinced that he loved me more than anyone else, and I refused to let him go. So when I was hospitalized for the second semester of my freshman year, I realized that this isn't so much something that I'm being dramatic about anymore. This is something that I now need to take seriously. And my recovery was fueled off the fact that I was pissed off at Ed, because he had stolen 5 years of my life. He had stolen countless birthdays and holidays and vacations, and he had stolen so many things from me that I will never get back, and something you can never get back is time. And I lost 5 whole years to something that will never benefit me. It didn't bring me anything. It nearly took my life away from me, but I still wanted it, and I was still addicted to it. And then I realized what a waste of time that was because of where it took me. And you listen to this illness and you listen to this demon and you think it's doing all the right things until you see things like this. And even still, people glorify it because they think that this shows willpower and that this shows what everybody wants. And in my head, I was convinced that that was the case until I realized that I looked like a skeleton and people were scared, not jealous. And when I walked around and I was on the other end pointing fingers and I was in grocery stores and I heard people gasp as they walked by, that wasn't jealousy, that was fear. They were scared that I wasn't going to be able to walk out of that store without passing out. When people saw me at the gym and they pointed at me, I thought they wanted to look like me. They were terrified for my life. But I couldn't see that because I was so blind because Ed wouldn't let me see that. So I was done listening to him. I was pissed off that he stole so much time from me. And my recovery started in the hospital. And I like to say that it started because recovery doesn't end when you're discharged. It doesn't end when you walk out of those doors. It just begins. And my recovery, I would say, took full recovery when I started in that hospital. It took about 2.5, 3 years from that point on to reach full recovery. And I consider myself fully recovered for about 1.5 years now. But I would say that every moment of that recovery process was painful, and it was hard, and it was full of tears, and everybody in my life was affected because I was miserable. But now everybody in my life is positively affected because of who I am. And I wouldn't say or trade anything to make that different. I love the process. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but it took me here, and that's a blessing. And I knew that full recovery was rare. I saw that in people who I was in treatment with. I read that. I saw it in magazines. I knew that eating disorders were really hard to escape. But as I said, I don't do half of anything. And when I was being 110% the best at being anorexic, I knew that I could channel that energy to be 110% the best at being recovered. And that's what I did. I switched my thinking. I realized that I wasn't going to die for something that wasn't going to benefit me. And I wasn't put on that earth to die 19 years later. And when I was in that hospitalization, I realized all of these things were coming to me, and the only person who could do anything about it was myself. The doctors can feed me, they can put me on these feeding tubes, they can give me IVs, but I needed to make the choice to make the change. Because this is a mental health issue. It's not physical health. You can't restore my weight and take away my problems. I needed to come to these revelations on my own. And that's what I did. And I've reached a full recovery, and I've never been more proud because this life that I live now is something I only dreamed of and never expected to reach. I expected, honestly, not to be here right now. And I accepted that for years. I accepted that my life was going to end around the age 20 and 21, and that was going to be it for me. And now I realize that my life is just beginning. And there's so many things that I've learned throughout this recovery process that I like to share. And what I'm going to continue on with today is what I've learned throughout that process to help anybody who's not necessarily just struggling with an eating disorder, but struggling with anything. So, to begin that, I'm going to start talking about just what the things that we can do are in order to prevent what happened to me, or kind of help along the process if you've already fallen into these traps. And I'm going to share a couple key points that I've discovered and things that I never would have learned if it weren't for this journey. So, I was convinced, again, that my self-worth was dependent on my size and my shape and my physical characteristics, but I realized that better is not synonymous with smaller. And I think the only way for me to come to that realization was to stop the self-comparisons. And that's the first thing I want to talk about. Oh, this is a lovely quote that I like to share. Don't compare. But anyway, stop the comparisons is the first point I want to make. So, what I talk about with this is that the self-comparisons that I made were what dug me into this deep hole. Because, like I said, you'll never be the best, and that's okay. And I realized that, again, I was never going to be the smallest, but the realization was that small is no longer synonymous with better, and that was groundbreaking for me. Because I didn't need to be the smallest to be the most kind-hearted. I didn't need to be the smallest to be the most selfless person in the room. I needed to be me, and I needed to have a strong heart in order to do that, not be the smallest. So these comparisons, as everybody knows, you don't compare apples to oranges, you don't compare cats to dogs, you don't compare things that aren't the same. And every person is different, and that's what makes a person person. If we were all the same, it'd be so boring, and we would all be super comparable because we would all be the exact same people. But that wouldn't make us superior, that would just make us boring. So can I have 2 people raise their hands and share? I'll ask a couple questions just to make some comparisons. 2 volunteers. No. Yes. Okay, Nat and Kiara. So, first of all, name.
Kiara.
Natalie.
Where are you from?
Italy.
Denver.
What is your major?
Psychology.
Policy studies.
What's your favorite color?
Green, pink.
Green.
Red.
What is it?
Red.
So, we go to the same university. We'd expect to have some similarities. Not a single answer was the same. So, she's a psychology major.
Policy studies.
Nothing in common. So maybe a few things. If I were to say that Kiara is much better at knowing the way that the brain works compared to Natalie, and that makes Kiara superior, that's not fair. Kiara studies that every single day. That's what she goes to school for, that's what she wants to study, that's what she wants to live. And to say that Natalie's not up to her standard because of that lack of knowledge isn't fair. But if I were to say that Kiara wasn't as intelligent that Natalie is about political science, that's not fair. She's never studied political science. So why do we try to make links between things that aren't comparable? We can't compare these 2 gals together. We can't compare anybody on this campus together because they're not the same. To make a comparison, they have to be synonymous. We don't compare apples to oranges. We can't compare people to people. So, when we talk about comparisons, we usually fall into the mindset that healthy looks and feels and tastes and appears the same on every single person. Because we have these stigmas in our head that healthy looks on a female like a toned, fit body about 5'5" with blonde hair. And we assume that a male who is healthy has strong muscles, he's really toned, he usually wears tank tops, and he looks really good on the beach. But that's not healthy. Because healthy is different on every single person. And what I'm going to emphasize on that fact is the way we fuel ourselves is different, and that's not healthy for everybody, because everybody needs something different. So I'm going to emphasize 3 athletes that you'll probably know one of them. The other 2 I'll explain. So, to preface all of this, it's recommended by society and by nutritionists and dietitians all over the world that women eat 2,000 calories a day and men eat 2,500. This is standardized, it's on every nutrition label that you see, it's everywhere that you go. This is the standard. So, Mr. Michael Phelps, when he was in the Olympics, it was pretty well known that he was eating, on every TV interview he talked about this, he was eating 12,000 calories a day to sustain his training. He swam for 8 hours a day, and there was no way that his body could possibly sustain itself on 2,500 calories. He would burn that by 8 a.m. So for us to say that he's unhealthy because he's eating 12,000 calories would be so horribly incorrect. Because if he were to eat 2,500, he would have withered away to nothing. And in the middle, we have an Olympic marathon runner. His name always slips me. His last name's Hall. Ryan Hall. Ryan Hall. He is one of the best marathon runners in the world. And if anybody knows marathon running, it's one of the most difficult and strenuous things on your body that you can do. He runs marathons all year long. He trains all year long. He competes all year long. He's constantly running. If we were to tell you that he was only eating 2,500 calories, he would end up in the hospital. He eats on non-training days about 6,000 calories a day because that's healthy to him. If he were to eat 2,500, he would wither away to nothing. And then we have an Olympic weightlifter. His name's Kendrick Ferris. And what he does is build his body up to compete. So he needs to eat a surplus, not even just to maintain. He needs to eat more than a normal person who's athletic should. So he's eating up to 10,000 a day, not doing any cardio, not doing anything but lifting weights, because that's what he needs to look that way. And that's what he needs to perform the way that he does. So to standardize 2,500 to all 3 people would drive all 3 people into the hospital. And that's not healthy. So for us to say that, okay, I'm a 5'7" girl, I should be eating about 1,800 calories a day, and maybe if I exercise for an hour, I'll add in an extra 300. That's not healthy for me. I'm a very active person. I walk a lot, I run a lot, I love to be in the gym, I love to find balance in what I do. But to sustain myself with my lifestyle, I have to eat a heck of a lot more calories than 2,000. And that's what's healthy for me. And to give a glimpse into what my body needed to recover, when I was in the hospital and my body had reached its lowest weight, I was eating around 7,000 calories a day to get myself up to stability, just to be able to have my body function on its own. That's what was healthy for me. If I would have continued to eat 1,800, 2,000 a day, I never would have recovered, because that wasn't healthy for me. So what I'm saying is that we can't standardize caloric intake, we can't standardize the way we fuel ourselves based on who you are, based on your physical stature, based on characteristics that you can only see with the naked eye. You need to go to a trained physician, you need to see what your metabolic rates are, you need to see so much more than just being characterized as a 5'7" girl. So, knowing that healthy looks different on everyone, and knowing that there's so many things you can do that may be different than the person next to you or the people around you in your classroom, there's another aspect of health and happiness that I love to talk about, and it's that balance is not just about food. And I thought that in order to get healthy and in order to recover, I had to feed myself. But I didn't realize that recovery was all-encompassing. It wasn't restoring my weight, just restoring my weight. It is a major factor, that's not the only thing. And it's not just finding another way to go out and be carefree and be able to eat dinner with like a normal person and go to a restaurant I've never been to. Those are parts of recovery, but it's not the only thing. So what balance looks like is your life. Balance looks like the people that you spend your time with. It looks like who you prioritize your time with. And it is all about living the life that you wanted to live when you couldn't because you were so consumed by what was going on in your mind. So when I was in the throes of my eating disorder, I never, ever, ever went out. I never hung out with anyone. I was a psychopath to my parents. I yelled at everyone. I was miserable all the time. We didn't go to dinner without a screaming fight. My friends didn't even want to be around me. I didn't want to be around myself. I was miserable. But balance is getting these things back. It's fighting for what I lost for 5 years. It's being normal. It's spending time with my best friends. It's spending time with my boyfriend. It's being able to go to events and do things that I never got to do because I was so sad. And I was so isolated and I was so triggered and I needed something to pull me away from that, and that was finding my life. So balance is not about eating more. It's not about eating better. It's not about working out more. It's about finding ways to proportion and distort all of these parts of your life so that they're even and they're equal. Because if I studied all day long, that's not balance. If I went out every night, that's not balance. But finding a way to do both while still maintaining my health and happiness is what recovery is. And that's what I found. And again, it's not limited to one aspect. It's all-encompassing. So on top of all of these things, we get so heated. The other thing we need to do is stop trusting everything we hear. Because there are so many inaccurate things out there that drove me to where I was. So, number one, I don't know how many of you have heard about the new coconut oil controversy. So, one of the controversies lately is that coconut oil was the best thing in the world for you. You used it for everything. Everything. Household items, you put it on you, you ate it, you did anything with it. They just told us that you should never do that, it's the worst thing in the world for you. So, what the heck do I believe? Because one says that I should do it, and one says to never touch it. So if I were to go to the store and buy coconut oil one day, and then I come home and this article comes out and I have to throw it away. But then the next day, this article comes out again, and now I go buy it again. And then I throw it out 24 hours later because now they're telling me it's bad for me. So if I were to listen to these things every single day, I would be driving myself in a vicious cycle of never knowing what to do because I was listening to other people and not listening to my body. If coconut oil tastes good and it feels good and I feel good when I eat it, I'm going to keep eating it. If it's not doing anything bad to my health, if it's benefiting me, if it's making me feel happy and I enjoy it, I'm going to keep doing it. Another example, simple eggs are now being discriminated because nobody understands what an egg actually does for us. I eat eggs every morning. I love eggs. If you tell me now that I need to stop eating them forever, I will spit on you because I love eggs. This is another example of constantly changing opinions, but all of us believing it. So you're telling me that, okay, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to buy eggs, and then 2 days later I'm going to have a heart attack because I just ate my egg. That's not how it works. Last thing, if you're a vegetarian, props to you. I could never do that. I love to eat meat. I needed to sustain my athletics. I needed to sustain my trainings. I need to eat a lot of protein. I could never cut protein out in the form of meat. There are a lot of controversy today as whether meat is good for you, meat is bad for you. Meat is great for some bodies. Meat might not be so great for other bodies. But to tell me that it's great for everyone or to tell me that it's horrible for everyone is not fair because my body is not composed of the same things. It doesn't react the same way to everybody else's. So if you were to put steak in somebody's body and it made them sick, stop eating steak. When I eat steak, I feel pretty good. I'm going to keep eating steak. We need to stop listening to these things and start listening to our bodies because that's what takes us to where we want to go. If we start listening to these vicious cycles and falling into what they're telling us, there's simply no way that we'll ever find our balance because we're constantly spinning. So, if something is food, food is neutral. People can be good people. People can be bad people. People can be happy people, sad people. You can categorize people based on how they act, what they do, how they treat other people. You cannot label food as good and bad. All of diet, all of taking care of yourself, nutrition is balance. If you were to tell me that every time I ate a slice of pizza I was a bad person, I would be a horrible person. Because every time I put something that's categorized as bad into my body, it's not attached to my self-worth. But that's something I could not fathom for years. Because if I even came near a slice of pizza, I thought that my self-worth dropped into the basement. And I thought that if I even thought about eating a French fry, that I lost all of my value. And what I realized was that the way we value these gives power to them. Because when we walk into a pizza shop and we realize that everybody around us is doing the same thing, we're all enjoying this, we're all equal. Do you look at somebody else and see them enjoying a slice of pizza and think they're a bad person? No. But when you do it to yourself, you think you're a bad person. You think that people look at you and look down on you. And you think people look at you and think worse of you. People are probably looking at you and they're jealous of you because they don't have pizza. Every time we categorize these things as good and bad, we fall into that trap of thinking worse of ourselves because of something neutral that we've now given power to. Food is not good, food is not bad. Food is fuel. Food for me was my medicine. It was the only thing that was going to get me into recovery. Because if I wouldn't have eaten, I would have died. You don't tell cancer patients not to take their medicine. You don't tell them not to go to treatment. You tell them to take care of themselves and do what they need to do. So if you told me not to eat good food and bad food, I never would have recovered because my body needed anything in order to get back to a stable state. Didn't matter what it was. It needed food, it needed fuel, and it needed medicine. So to tell me that it's good or bad is so terribly wrong. We need to stop listening to these. We need to realize that food should not be labeled and shouldn't be categorized. It's neutral, and it should always remain neutral. So, the last point, is we need to stop labeling things because I'm not a bad person because I love Tostitos and because I will tailgate a few times a year. Sorry. I will go out and I will have fun and I will eat whatever's there because my body enjoys it and I enjoy it and it makes me happy. That doesn't make me a bad person. That doesn't make me less valuable. That doesn't make me less worthy. It just makes me human. And I guarantee you that everybody around me at this fun day drink was wishing they had the chips that I had. They weren't thinking of me and thinking, wow, she's really, really horrible. They're jealous. So stop thinking of food as good, bad, yes, no, right, wrong. It's neutral. And the last thing I'm going to tell you is we need to let our bodies take the lead. Because when I didn't let my body take the lead and I let society take the lead, and then I let Ed take the lead, and then I let the social media aspect of my life take the lead, and I let everything except myself take me to where I needed to go. Your body is so much smarter than you think it is. Your body repairs itself, it knows how to fix itself, it knows what to do when it's lacking in one area. It's able to compensate for everything you throw at it. So let it do its job. If I'm telling it what's right and wrong, it already knows that. So let it tell me. I need to stop training it to listen to me. I need to train myself to listen to it. And that's the last thing that I'll leave you with, because as I learn about balance and as I continue to go through my recovery process, the only thing that guides me is this. My body is my compass. I listen to its signals and I listen to its cues and I listen to everything it tells me because that's what balance is. If it's tired, I'm going to rest. If it's hungry, I'm going to eat. If it's super exhausted, I just might take the whole day off because that's what I need in order to take care of myself. It's no longer feeling the pressure to do something or be somewhere. It's taking care of myself and letting my body take over. So final slide, no more points, but this is my favorite quote. And I'm going to leave it with you. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about. I won't read it to you, but this is one of my favorite things because what I realized in the midst of my disorder, in the midst of my struggles, was that I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to get rid of this illness. I didn't know what to do about it. And I thought that my mind was too far gone to solve anything. And this quote brought me a lot of hope throughout my recovery. It still brings me a lot of hope because when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I realize that it doesn't have to take, you don't have to move mountains to make progress. You don't have to go and realize that I'm going to jump face first into the deep end. I'm just going to go and I'm going to start moving. I'm going to start moving in the right direction and I'm going to do that in small steps, but that's what counts. And those small steps turn into bigger steps and those bigger steps turn into leaps, and that's what brought me here. So if you're ever struggling and you need something to read, this is one of my favorite things in the entire world. It's such a great reminder. And that's going to be it for me. If any of you have questions or anything, if you want to hear more about Project Heal, If you want to hear more about my story or have any questions regarding that, please feel free. I'll stick around for a while. Other than that, I cannot thank you guys enough for coming. It means the world to me, and being able to share my message and my story is amazing. So I thank you a million times over, and I hope to see some of you around, or if you have any questions, please feel free, but thank you so much.